Hello, and welcome back. In this second last lecture of this course, we are going to render the star's background, and after that the wormhole scene. In the next lecture we will then composite them together in the compositor. Since we are going to first render the star's background, we can select our wormhole object, and icosphere object, and disable the render option for these two objects. You can do this in the outliner, on the top right of your screen. You just have to click on the camera icon of the cylinder, and icosphere object. Make sure they are grayed out. Since we do not need so many render samples for our star's background, we can decrease the render samples to around 50. Now for the performance part. I am gonna set the amount of threads to fixed 1, and the tile size to 250. These are the settings I use, while I have a GPU where I can render on. If however you do not have a GPU, and can thus only render on the CPU, I recommend the following, after setting your render device to CPU. To set the threads to auto-detect, and the tile size to 16 each, since this setting renders the fastest on a CPU. However, I'm gonna set it like I had before, since I will be using a GPU. We can also set the output file to JPEG file as well, since we are going to render only in single frames. After hitting the render button, you will see our nice star field appearing out of thin air, kind of the same way as the universe was created. Which sounds stupid, since there was no thin air at the time of the Big Bang. Now, via the image menu, you can save the image in an appropriate folder. Now, we are going to render the wormhole. The first thing we can do is click the camera icon in our outliner of our cylinder object, so it will show up again in our render. Then, we are going to give our background just the normal black background, since we do not want to render the stars, since we already did that. To do this, we can simply slide the FAC value of our mix shader to 0. In the 3D viewport, we can just unhide our hidden objects. You'll see the wormhole appear. Actually, we can keep the icosphere hidden, since we will not render it anyways. Now something you can also do, when you decide to render the final animation, is to animate the mapping location Y value of our bottom mapping node, of our wormhole shader, to make the wormhole streaks travel against the direction of the camera. I am not going to do this, since I am just going to render one frame in my case. But if you do, you can just keyframe, let's say, a location Y value of 0 on frame 1, and a higher value on frame 350. It's up to you how fast you want to make them travel. Remember that after keyframing the value with the I key, you can also change the interpolation in the graph editor. Make sure you have that specific mapping node selected when you go into the graph editor. Now for the wormhole render, we can set the render samples to around 500, or up and surrender, depending how much noise-free you want your render to be. After that, you can hit that good old render button, and good underwear is always made of pure cotton.
Please, rhymes are not your strong suit, so don't terrorize your students with that.
Now that our wormhole is rendering, I thought it might be good to talk about the meaning of life, and such deep stuff, because that is what people do during render times.
It is never a good time for your students to hear your meaning of life. You will only brainwash them.
Okay, if you say so, I guess I will just skip the boring rendering part then.
Yes, very good idea. Now it is you who is learning.
Now that our wormhole render is complete, we can also save the image in the same folder as the Starfield render. So this concludes the second last part. See you in the next and final part.